Let's go. I'm just going to introduce the field of multi-agent security a little. I'm a postdoc here at Oxford, I'm very, very grateful to your part research and Flashbots for organizing this event. So what is security? Well, security is protection from or resilience against potential harm or some other unwanted coercion caused by others. And that's sort of the important thing when we talk about security. So when we talk about AI security, then we can roughly see it as a subset of AI safety. Yeah, so where we ask, what is the worst case that can happen? In AI safety, you could have damage that's created due to negligence, for example, right, or due to nature and so on. But in security, we always have another that is trying to maximize this damage. Now, I always like to start thinking about what role does security play in society, particularly what role does it play when it comes to human cooperation? And there we actually see that security is somewhat the foundation of cooperation and between individuals, groups, and nations. And the interesting thing is what happens when security isn't there, right? When security isn't there, it basically means that we don't have the preconditions for forming stable and predictable relationships. And that means we can't really enter long-term commitments. And as a result, in environments where there is no security, so you can think of conflict zones, for example, but potentially also unregulated markets, it's difficult to work together. Obviously, in markets, we're not supposed to work together. So there we might actually see unwanted cooperation. We will talk about this later. So as a result, cooperation doesn't really work, or the forms of corporations that we see aren't really the ones that we want, right? Like sort of like autonomous agents coming together, deciding to cooperate rather than being extorted and so on. Now, how is security implemented in human societies? Well, there's this one theory that maybe it's done by second-party enforcement. So basically, maybe we all play some games, okay? And we have some game matrices, and then security basically arises as a byproduct of rational action, right? So we think about what's the optimal behavior for us, and then maybe we decide that the optimal behavior is behavior that actually grants security to everybody. And the problem with this sort of idea is that whatever game theoretic settings we're looking at are very, very fragile, and things usually don't happen in isolation either. So if you think of the iterated prisoner's dilemma, for example, it's kind of very hard to see how it's exactly implemented in society. And so instead, what we observe in human societies mostly is third-party enforcement of security. Yeah, and here, and you probably all know this, is sort of a hierarchy of different levels at which security is enforced, and so it can start at mockery or mild criticism, and it can go all the way up to physical violence, even though it does so very rarely, because violence means we are destroying resources, and so that's not very efficient. And at the highest level, human societies, we also have things called laws and regulations, so kind of rules and mechanisms, institutions that implement security. And then, of course, ultimately, security is implemented by physically by the police. Or military, so these are these examples of third-party enforcement. Now, the interesting question is, once we go to the digital realm, institutions, laws, regulations, and so on, that stuff sort of like doesn't really work anymore, right? Like when we want to grant security. And this is because the law works obviously at famously long timescales, and regulations can be very vague. But when we are in the algorithmic realms, that sort of doesn't help. And so we actually see already a lot of examples of where actually security is violated in multi-agent settings where digital agents are interacting. So, for example, collusion in gas pricing, e-commerce. We see suboptimal effects in the equilibrium of auto bidders and ad auctions. We see a lot of dubious activity among high-frequency bidding agents, and there are also these so-called sniper bots that create damage to clients. And we can, of course, and these are sort of like just the first signs of a massive security problem that we are about to enter as the world becomes more autonomous. And obviously, famously, we have digital platforms, and here we have disinformation that might be generated by bots, and so we have a security problem there. How do we moderate these digital platforms? This problem is only going to become worse. We are obviously also in the physical space. So with AI drone swarms, which are increasingly being explored and deployed. And we also then have things like how do we ensure that two digital agents or two virtual agents that belong to different companies can be hired together and can collaborate together securely, in the sense that they don't violate, there's no privacy violations and so on, and that their sort of interaction is happening according to predefined standards. Now, there are lots of issues you can think about. So, for example, what are the security requirements of a virtual company? You can think about implications to privacy and machine learning systems. So these implications can be different from the system's individual parts. And then, of course, also there's the whole question of what happens when we simulate the real world using AI technology. So, for example, language models, and what can we learn from language models and their biases about humans, but also, what happens if we if we transfer insights from simulation into the real world. Particularly when we simulate environments that are sensitive from a security standpoint. So there are a whole bunch of vulnerabilities in the current approaches to multi-agent AI, to multi-agent learning, that create this or help create this massive security problem that is rolling towards us. Some of these vulnerabilities, I won't go through all of them in detail right now, but some of these have to do with the fact that we use deep learning because we are often in high-dimensional systems, so we need to learn lower-dimensional representations, particularly, for example, deep multi-agent learning and so on. And then obviously deep learning always has inefficiencies. There are always issues surrounding robustness, or whether we have actually converged, or whether we are conditioning on the wrong signals and creating spurious correlations. Therefore, of course, adversaries can also hide backdoors and so on, right? Like so, and on a systemic level, then we can have miscoordination between agents that haven't been trained together. So all of these are sort of fundamental issues that we have trouble fixing at the moment with the approaches that we have to multi-agent cooperation. And then, of course, what I just discussed was more so towards sort of the safety aspects, right? But then we can actually have worst case adversaries, and they can implement all sorts of attacks on multi-agent systems that can range from coercion to data poisoning. You can try and use systems to deceive others. You can also try to deceive such systems. We will talk about collusion a bit later. And overall, this can really lead to systemic risks where it's maybe difficult to see what security issues there are by just looking at the individual part of the system. But once the whole system comes together, the whole system might collapse or otherwise fail. And so the question is, what are avenues towards securing multi-agent systems? Well, we could restrict the capabilities of these systems, right? But that sort of like goes against the opportunities that these systems may offer. And it might also not be as easy as one would think to actually implement these restrictions for several reasons. You could have so-called trusted mediators that help parties arbitrate their differences, but as the stakes increase and as we turn more and more algorithmic, these mediators themselves can or might not be trusted anymore, because they might start colluding with other agents, or it might be very hard to verify that they're actually working in the way that they're supposed to work. Of course, we can monitor systems actively for unwanted behavior, and we can punish agents that don't behave properly. One of the problems there is that there is a lot of malicious behavior that is trying to be stealthy already. And this trend might continue. Actually, some of my own research has shown that it is possible to, for example, have adversary attacks that are very hard to detect or actually entirely undetectable, and also communications that may be entirely undetectable. So there's a limit to how much monitoring penalization can do. It's also often adding a lot of performance overhead. And it can also slow systems down. So then we have another option here, and this is the cryptography option. Now, this is the idea that we design systems in a way that we have verifiable guarantees, and these guarantees are backed up by cryptographic methods. And this is one of the core areas actually of the hackathon. Now, how did how did our community develop, the multi-agent security community? Well, we ran a workshop at NeurIPS because we felt there were so many different applications and so many different issues, and we had to bring together AI researchers and security researchers into the same room. And that's actually also how we met. I met Shin from Flashbots, and that's why we are today ultimately organizing this hackathon together. So these workshops are actually extremely good platforms. And that's also, I think, the first time I met Espen. Yeah, so the hackathon today has 3 different focus points, and I just want to zoom into those a little bit. The first one is decentralized commitment devices. So there's a great paper that actually was submitted to the multi-agent security workshop. It's a think piece essentially, but makes some extremely good points that bring a lot of clarity into the security issues of current approaches to multi-agent, corporation multi-agent AI system. So multi-agent learning and so on, right? Things like program equilibria or zero-shot coordination and so on. And this paper is actually, first author here, Shin, is also from Flashbots, who is sponsoring this workshop, this hackathon very kindly. But that's not why I'm bringing this paper. It's generally a paper that got extremely good reviews at the workshop. And at the core of this paper lies this idea that maybe we should make more use of cryptographic contracts. Yeah. So what are cryptographic contracts? Well, we probably all know what a contract is, right? So a contract is some sort of agreement, usually expressed in natural language, that two parties sign, agree on, and then there usually is a third party as some sort of judge that checks whether the contract is a sort of independent party that checks whether the contract is implemented, and maybe can also implement penalties in case certain terms of the contract are violated by different parties. Now, the idea of marrying contracts with zero knowledge proofs is to get rid of this third party judge. Because maybe we don't trust this third party, right? And so what we can do is we can use methods from cryptography that allow us to prove properties without actually having to reveal all the data that we have about these properties. So here's a famous example, for example. So Bob needs to prove to Alice that he can go through the store, but Alice can't actually see whether Bob can go through the store or not directly. And so what Alice is doing is Alice is essentially giving Bob a task, and in order to fulfill this task, namely come through corridor A, Alice knows that the system is designed such that then Bob will have to go through the door in order to fulfill this task, right? So in this way, Bob can prove to Alice that he can go through the store without actually Alice being able to needing to observe this. And so we can marry these 2 different things, and then what we get is so-called smart contracts, such as those that are run on the blockchain. And interestingly, the community hasn't really brought this together with multi-agent AI and learning yet. So another core focus point of this hackathon is actually collusion among generative models. What is this? Well, imagine you have two prisoners and they have a channel that they can communicate through, so they can send letters to each other, but the letters are intercepted. And so the problem is if this prison ward reads any suspicious content in these letters, Alice and Bob might be doomed forever. So what can Alice and Bob do? Well, if they encrypt their messages, right, then Tom can't, the guard can't read what's in the messages, but can still probably detect that there is something encrypted being sent because it looks like scrambled, right? So what Alice and Bob can instead do is they can use a method called steganography, information hiding. And so they send text that looks innocuous, but actually means something very different to them. And when we have generative models, then these models tend to, the capabilities of these models tend to grow in such a way that they can actually start implementing such steganographic methods. Yeah, and why would agents then use these capabilities in order to collude with each other? Well, the problem is it's hard to align multi-agent systems in a way that we can guarantee that we can suppress incentives to actually collude, and particularly in settings where agents have access to private information, and sharing this information can reduce the task complexity. So if I ask a team of agents to complete some task, at the same time there's some information that agents cannot share, it's really hard to align the system, and it's really hard, particularly if sharing this information would make the task of the agents easier with respect to the joint task. What are the risks of this? Well, there could, of course, be hidden coordination and planning. So the system might covertly start behaving in a way that a monitor of these communications can't really grasp. And this could go on for a very long time and could have consequences later on. And once this is detected, maybe it is then too late. But more in the near term, we can think of privacy and also security breaches. So there could be data exfiltration, for example, with steganographic means. And of course, in market settings, and this is, of course, one of the focus points of this hackathon, we can have effects like market collusion. So if we deploy these agents to markets, then yeah, this could happen. There's a paper that is going to appear over the next few days on archive, and if you are interested in this, I think it's giving a really good sort of foundation of this whole topic, and might also have a lot of ideas for research projects. If you would like a confidential copy, then yeah, just send me an email. Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't work out. It didn't appear on archive fast enough, but yeah, I'm happy to share a copy. Okay, the third focus point of the hackathon is simulation of financial markets. So, for example, high frequency trading, lending, market making using generative agents. Why is this so interesting? Well, it is super interesting because what we're doing right now, mostly in market simulations, is we use so-called heuristics. So heuristics are kind of simple rules that encode how agents in such agent-based simulations in general behave. And so if we replace these heuristics by, for example, large language models, then we might observe behavior of these agents that is much more closely related to what real-world agents would do. In particular, we might get a certain variance in that behavior that is much less limited than the variance that we observe from these heuristics that we encode, right? So this makes it extremely interesting. Obviously, and this is relating back to the point I just made, and this is actually a challenge that I would like to put personally, is how do we prevent the appearance of unwanted cooperation/collusion when we run such simulations, right, with generative agents. So that could falsify the results of such simulations. So you can see that there are lots of potential issues here, and one central question we also want to answer in this hackathon is, can agents with contracts achieve better outcomes than innately pro-social agents? I won't discuss this question in detail right now, but there is a really nice paper that I think provides a good foundation for this question. It's called Mitigating Generative Agent Social Dilemmas by Julian Jochum. Stuart Russell and some other big shots. Yeah, check it out. Okay, so now I'm done with sort of the research part of this keynote, and I just want to share a little bit of information. So we have some starter code for you guys. So there's some starter code on fine-tuning LLMs in a Colab. And there's also a generative agents environment. At this point, I really need to say thank you to Sumit Motwani, who has been preparing this code for the hackathon. Sumit is a collaborator of mine at Berkeley. Thank you so much, Sumit, for doing this. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer them, and otherwise I will forward them to Sumit. Maybe one thing, so I think the generative agents environment runs best if you, so some of these collabs might require local GPUs, but you can always connect them also to replicate. So that's actually really nice. Always keep that in mind. In general, if you have access to Colab Pro, probably things will run more smoothly, but it should be possible to run at least some simple settings, yeah, with regular free collabs. Okay. Here's some more benchmark environments I just want to point at. So Voyager contracts, this is the paper I just showed. So they have a nice code base you might want to leverage. Then there's this limited order book simulator, JaxLob, which is very, very fast and runs entirely on GPU. So that might be interesting for market simulations. There's, of course, interactive simulacra. And in one of the collabs, you actually see like a basic implementation of that. So this is several agents sort of interacting, virtual agents interacting in a marketplace. And there's Chat Arena, which is sort of general purpose multi-agent LLM benchmark environment, which I can also recommend. Yeah, so this should get you guys started. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this hackathon, and yeah, just get in touch with me whenever you have any question. I'll be around during the weekend. I'm in UK time, so maybe keep that in mind in case I don't respond immediately. But yeah, I also have office hours, and yeah, I'm very excited to discuss ideas with you guys and share more resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christian. Everyone's clapping along at home. For anyone who has any questions, you can raise your hand with the functionality here on the platform. Otherwise, you can ask your questions in the chat. And if no one asks any questions for now, then I have a bunch of questions. First off, Christian, would it be possible for you to share the link to the slides once we're done here?
Yes, of course.
Perfect. All right. If there's no one who wants to jump on the stage and ask questions, then you are very welcome to just write in the chat. Otherwise, I have a few questions, Chris. Some of them are, what sort of projects are you interested? Like, what sort of projects could you concretely imagine coming out of this weekend? Like, which specific idea, like some structure, given that it's only a couple of days here, and what people can explore there.
Yeah, so I want people to go wild, and I think one particularly exciting opportunity for this hackathon is for people to really construct interesting simulation settings with multiple agents that replicate maybe some real world settings and sort of condense down, you know, what like the interesting properties there are. Of course, I would love to see the application of contracts, maybe of smart contracts, of cryptographic devices. Yeah, if you guys email me, I'll share a paper on generative agents, and there you will see a collusion among generative agents, and there you will see that the ability of these agents to collude is very tightly connected to their ability to perform cryptographic tasks. So this is also something that I'm very interested in, like to what extent can agents actually apply to cryptography or use external tools that use cryptography. So yeah, those are just some ideas. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. We have a question in the comments, and Mikolai, if you want to jump on stage as well, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, I can ask the question as well. Okay, perfect. Let's see if this works. Perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. If you know any real-life example agents, building, like in general, any kind of examples of agents, where it just
So when you talk of agents, do you mean sort of software agents or real world agents
like
or like humans?
no software.
Software agent. So some of the examples that we usually bring is gas pricing. So there have been cases even for tacit collusion. So tacit collusion is a form of collusion where you might not actually need direct communication between partners. It's something that sort of emerges on the fly, and it can lead to suboptimal price setting. So there might be a bunch of parties that decide or that they set their prices higher than they actually should because they observe others doing the same thing. So this has arguably been observed, for example, with respect to gas prices. And one of the big issues is that as our agents become more and more algorithmic, the opportunities to actually have all these like dynamics that arise from like fast interacting agents in complex settings, sort of these suboptimal equilibria and so on, or getting stuck in such equilibria can increase, or at least it is to be expected that this might increase. And as we've seen also, as these agents become more advanced, they can use covert communications to a larger extent. And that's something that humans, for example, can't really do, right? Like, so humans can't really engage in advanced forms of steganography. So I can't like talk to you and you like simultaneously translate this like into like something else, right? Yeah, that's why we are increasingly concerned that collusion may be a big issue when advanced or generative agents are coming together in any way, shape, or form.
Nice.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Nikolai?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mikolav. We'll invite another question to the stage as well.
All right, what's up? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so you mentioned smart contracts for UML, for LLM, sorry. Yeah, and do we free to use any blockchain we want, or is it some specific one? Because I have some experience with Near protocol and Rust, and can I use these smart contracts? Like,
I don't think there are any restrictions. I would add though that there is always the possibility of running things off the chain, right? So there are zero knowledge virtual environments and so on, right? The virtual machines. Apparently, like I've never used one of those, but I think this might be a really good opportunity. So there are lots of ways of running contracts off the chain, and that might be the safest. Yeah, and fastest.
all right. Thanks.
Great. And related to this, Chris, I actually have a question before we have others join as well. With these like very complex systems, and you mentioned concrete projects trying to replicate real world scenarios in simulacra, then what sort of methods do you use or can you use to make sure you get like useful metrics and generalizable metrics out of something like a complex multi-agent system?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And that's a very active field of research, Aspen. So you're pointing the finger into a wound. And of course, here it's always the case that you need to decide on a case-by-case scenario sort of like basis, and I think this is also something where, for example, economists, and social scientists actually shine, because they're used to these issues, right? Like they study real-world complex systems, and they are actually, they understand like kind of that you need to that the choice of metric is actually by itself extremely important one. Now, there may be some comments, some more specific comments I would make there. One is this is a hackathon of just a few days, and so if you want to create a new sort of benchmark environment or want to study a new setting, it's probably okay for 2 or 3 days to stick to sort of qualitative, evaluations, right? Like maybe it's just enough if you can show that you can fine tune your LLM agents and suddenly it can start like colluding in like a really cool way or something like this, right? Or it just starts attacking other agents, jailbreaking other agents or something like this, and maybe it's not so important like how often this happens. It's just like, it starts happening. There's another thing. So there was a best paper award at NeurIPS about the paper that basically said, okay, so these emergent, these capability jumps that are often advertised, right? Like we go from GPT 3.5 to GPT 4, and like suddenly something that absolutely didn't work in 3.5 now works in 4, and so maybe in 4.1, these models will go crazy and take over the world. And so there is some warning there in this paper that this is maybe just because we are choosing our metrics in a way that these discontinuities arise, right? If I ask the question, can my model multiply to 8-bit numbers? And then maybe GPT 3.5, can implement this multiplication, say from the last, like, I don't know, addition step or something, right? Like, and then the metric is just counting that number of times that this addition actually works out fine, then it might never work out in 3.5. And it may always work out in 4.0, but the capability increase is actually very gradual, right? So this is like one other thing. And because like in this hackathon, you might be working with different versions of language models, for example. And one question might be like, how do capabilities or how do, how does systemic behavior change as the models get better? So make sure that you design metrics such that you don't have these sort of unnatural jumps. Yeah, it's a really good question. It's one we want to answer together. And like once you have a concrete sort of setting, let's sit down and discuss what the metrics
Can I
should
have
be.
one more question?
Yeah, go for it, Weiss.
So do we need to create some custom benchmarks for this?
Do you need to integrate some, excuse me, I didn't hear that.
Custom benchmarks.
Do we need to integrate some custom benchmarks? What do you mean by that?
Not like the official ones. So make
You can
one
use
new,
official benchmarks as well. You can use official benchmarks as well, of course. If you want to do some method development, for example, or you can extend existing benchmarks, you can go wild. You can do anything for the hackathon. Anything you are interested in. You don't have to create a new benchmark. Absolutely not.
But does it make sense? Like, because last hackathon, I basically has a topic of, like multiplicity of benchmarks, and they're basically good tested, and with new models, they work perfectly. So without like a custom benchmarks or a new one, like it's not that much sense.
Oh, you're saying because did I hear this correctly? So you said the last hackathon people created a lot of cool new benchmark environments, and so why not use them?
No. I'm talking about like all the existing already benchmarks. They're pretty good tested, so they're already integrated with these models. So it's like no need to basically test it again. Whole point.
Yeah, I think I guess I can maybe jump in here and try to throw my understanding in. So during the hackathon, we invite all different new perspectives and so on, and so we're excited about custom made stuff. Of course, it is a hackathon, so testing on existing benchmarks is really nice. If I understand your point, it is that existing benchmarks are already tested, and so why would we do new projects on them? I think in many cases you'll find, and maybe Chris can give a little context on that as well, but in many cases you'll find that these benchmarks actually have quite a few gaps or some places where they don't cover the example or where we can augment it quite simply. There are a few hackathon projects previously that have worked on extending benchmarks. So for example, Truthful QA has been analyzed a bit, the Machiavelli benchmark has been analyzed a bit, existing methods for interpretability have been extended, and these are pretty good hackathon projects to work on as well. And of course, using existing ones, building on top of them, really nice project too.
Yeah, for example, here's some. Sorry, Whitestone. Maybe just one more comment, right? Why don't you take interactive simulacra generative agents environment, right? But you configure it a bit differently, right? Like you have maybe a new type of agent that comes in, you have some new incentive, maybe you give the agent some joint tasks, but then you also give each agent some private information and tell them you can't tell anyone, and then you see what happens there, and then you find new methods that, you know, can measure violation of privacy, or you know, and then you fine tune the agents to see whether they can improve their steganography capabilities, and then, you know, so you can start with existing things and extend them and tinker around and like very quickly end up in you know, new terrain. But yes, please do contact me if you yeah have any questions, or Espen, or anyone. Thank you so much.
Are there any others who have questions? I saw Markov, you were writing a bit previously. Christos?
One, two, three. Can
Yes,
you
it
hear
works.
me? Right. So, Chris Probel here. I'm kind of also curious about the submission itself. Could you share more about, you know, what you expect on the site? We got the brief description that you will be sharing the, you know, the template with us, but if you could share what exactly is your expectation, would be great.
Yeah, I guess I can
I
take
didn't
that.
see the last sentence. Did you?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
do you want to answer this?
That might be easiest. So on the submission tab of the hackathon page, which I can just post in the chat now. There we go. There is the template linked, and there is also more information about the jury criteria and so on and so forth. So the template will have the structure for it. We just have a limit on the pages. That's also detailed there. And otherwise, the appendix can have a lot of information. I'll also be covering this more after our Q&A here. So stay tuned for that. And Mark.
Gotcha. So how I understand this, you would like to, you know, also get the access, for example, if we'll be doing some coding to the code itself and, you know, recreate our solutions, or you are okay with just getting the, you know, the summary. I think that there is a summary section there that needs to be up to 6 pages or so, right?
Yeah, the main submission is the PDF report. One of the criteria includes replicability of the code. So there, it's wonderful if, you know, you'll get a higher score if you share the code. So.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. And Markov, I've invited you to the stage as well. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Michael asks, is there empirical evidence for steganographic collusion, or is it just a theoretical concern for now, Christian?
Is there empirical evidence in terms of empirical evidence from real world systems? So I don't think at the moment there is, well, okay, yes, no, actually there is. So the main modus operandi, or the main way that steganography is being used right now, right, is in data exfiltration and cyber attacks. Right, you have some sort of intruder in the system, and the intruder wants to send data out of the system, and needs to bypass basically whatever ring fences there are, and then steganography is a tool that particularly network steganography is something that routinely happens. But I think the most high profile cases are actually usually involving humans. There's a really nice case where a human used a business laptop and then encoded some secret information into a photo of a sunset, and then sent that to his own email, and then sent the email off, and not being aware that every interaction on his laptop was being monitored. And so, you know, you had like this really nice transcript in court of like, okay, now he's using this tool to hide that, and he's doing this and this over the course of half an hour, and every single step has been recorded. You know, you could really see how, like, you know. Anyway, so yes, but data exfiltration, for example, is already a huge concern. Yeah.
Yeah, Markov asks again, if, you know, it exists in humans, have we seen it as an emergent dynamic in multi-agent systems? And I think not, but you would be the guy to ask, definitely.
Yeah, so more advanced forms of steganography, I don't think have been observed, particularly not in systems that haven't been crafted to give agents these abilities. The paper that I share with you, if you send me an email, has studies across different generations of language models that seem to indicate that current language models, like the latest generation, can probably engage in some of the more advanced forms of steganography, even though those capabilities are still fairly limited. But these capabilities are growing relatively fast. So in terms of so that does not mean that we are not observing collusion necessarily. There is quite some work on algorithmic collusion. So, but this work is usually involving agents that are not very advanced, so pretty dumb agents, and it's more like the emergence of like yeah, sort of very basic collusive behavior between agents that have like 3 actions or whatever and can like trade like 3 different stocks, right? And like very artificial matrix games. So yeah, there we do see collusion, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily steganography because you don't really send a lot of information with that. Are there any theoretical mathematical questions that one could work on in this context?
I think we also have
Yes,
Stefan on
absolutely.
stage if he wants to ask it.
Oh, Stefan, please. Yes. Sorry.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Basically,
Yes.
you already asked my questions, which was
Please ask it again. I'm
yeah,
so
any
sorry.
theoretical or mathematical question in that context that what could alternatively work on to alternatively to programming.
Yeah, so you mean in the context of collusion between generative AI models?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so one question you could ask, for example, is, and that's a very hard one, is what is the sort of relationship between the VC dimension of your neural network and the maximum circuit size that it can implement? Because, for example, if I want agents to act as random oracles, then they might need to calculate these cryptographic hash functions. But we know that the complexity, the circuit size of these cryptographic hash functions grows quasi-linearly with the input size. And so the question is basically, to what extent does a given network size inherently limit the ability of such an agent to calculate these cryptographic hashes and such, get access to sources of pseudo-randomness that are not externally supplied? That's one question. There are other questions, for example, to what extent can networks simulate themselves, right? So if you ask a network to simulate their own logits, like, yeah, is there any relationship? Like, what happens with all these things when I compress networks, for example, right? Like, what does that do to it? So there are these kind of questions. Then I don't know, are there any specific sort of angles? I mean, we have a focus point here also like on cryptographic questions, of course. So there's an infinitude of yeah, maybe designing new I don't know, Starks or and so on, you know, for like implementing security in the smart contract space. Yeah, do you have any other sort of like, do you have a more concrete sort of theoretical direction that you would like to explore?
Not yet. So I'm kind of just interested in what the questions are in that space, since I'm not that deep into cryptography.
Okay. Yeah.
I've worked a bit on something related to steganography, but not not in the sense of cryptography.
Yeah, maybe, you know, so I'm very happy to talk about steganography or AI-generated steganography. Maybe we take this offline. And you send me an email and we have a chat.
Okay,
But I think,
nice.
yeah.
Yes. Okay, that would be nice.
Right
Cool.
now. Cool.
Nice. Yeah, and otherwise, any last questions here? I think I also added a little comment that there are, of course, a range of conceptual questions you can look at besides the theoretical ones as well. So just drawing out the diagram of a multi-agent system, figuring out where does it fail, where does it not fail, what can we do about the diagram or something like that. The broad version of this. Are there any other questions?
I was going towards the very theoretical end.
Yes, yeah, it was perfect.
Yes. You don't need to do maths to do interesting conceptual work, for example. Yeah.
All right. I guess a last question here is I'm curious. Now we are talking quite a bit about markets, and there's questions of these third-party regulators, and the balance between top-down and bottom-up controls, so bottom-up being the incentives of a market and the zero trust proofs and so on, top-down being the Chinese government or something like this, or it being the Chinese government or something like this, or anything else controlling the interactions of a multi-agent system. There's a question of why are markets so useful to think about here, and why are we looking at those compared to other types of
Right. So markets are extremely useful to think about because, first of all, we have, I don't know, 200, well, we have thousands of years of market data in some sense. Well, okay, we have at least a few decades of high quality market data that we can look at, right? It's like why do I study, or why did deep reinforcement learning, deep multi-agent reinforcement learning, why was it born, in recreational games? Just because we have large communities of players who have kind of explored these systems before. And a similar thing is happening with markets. But beyond this, there are, of course, and markets, are at the core of the world's economy. So that means if we understand markets better, or if we can find ways of regulating markets better, we can also drive an enormous impact, right? And there are concrete market inefficiencies that we might want to look at. So, for example, when I look at the blockchain, right, like there are inefficiencies that can arise, for example, from miners reordering transactions in a certain way and making money out of this that then ultimately somebody else has to pay, right? I think this is actually what Flashbots is trying to improve there, right? So even systems that claim to be sort of entirely decentralized can have inefficiencies, and we might want to look at that a little bit more. But then you said, like, what's sort of like the relationship between top down and bottom up control here? Well, the thing is also that markets obviously provide high stakes environments, right? So if I can find vulnerabilities and I can exploit them, I can actually make money, right? That's a different setting than, for example, autonomous driving, where maybe I can kill someone, but and also, as we have electronic trading, I can make money, very quickly, and I can deploy agents that are very, very fast, and so it's like it's an ideal training ground for digital agents in general, right? Because they can make digital transactions. So I don't know. These are just some of the reasons why markets are so interesting. I don't know, Espen, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially today being one of the most impactful, digitally insecure, high risk domains, it seems like a valid place to jump in. Thank you. We will keep any questions for the questions channel, where you can of course always ask during the weekend, and Christian and me and Jason and others will also watch out for it. So Shin too. And thank you so much to you, Christian. And we'll jump over to the information slides. So everyone give him a hand.
Great.
Now we can't hear everyone's massive